This is Land of Havilah with the book of 2 Chronicles, the 14th book of the Old Testament. It picks up where 1 Chronicles left off. It contains much of the same information as 1 and 2 Kings. In some passages, 2 Chronicles is more detailed than the Kings, and in other passages it's not as detailed. So there is some material here we don't get in any other book. As usual, we'll read a few verses at a time and give a few comments for understanding. And we don't skip any verses. We'll read the whole thing. We keep the comments short. We use the World English Bible, for one, because it's a very accurate translation, and secondly, it's not copyrighted, which allows us to post the entire text without legal issues. 1 Chronicles left off with the anointing of young Solomon as king and the death of David. How did Solomon fare? 2 Chronicles chapter 1, verse 1. Solomon the son of David was firmly established in his kingdom, and Yahweh his God was with him, and made him exceedingly great. Solomon spoke to all Israel, to the captains of thousands and of hundreds, to the judges, and to every prince in all Israel, the heads of the fathers' households. So Solomon and all the assembly with him went to the high place that was at Gibeon, for God's tent of meeting was there, which Yahweh's servant Moses had made in the wilderness. But David had brought God's ark up from Kiriath-Jearim to the place that David had prepared for it, for he had pitched a tent for it at Jerusalem. Moreover, the bronze altar that Bezalel the son of Uri, the son of Hur, had made was there before Yahweh's tabernacle, and Solomon and the assembly were seeking counsel there. Solomon went up there to the bronze altar before Yahweh, which was at the tent of meeting, and offered 1,000 burnt offerings on it. Comment in verse 1, Solomon the son of David was firmly established in his kingdom. There's more detail in 1 Kings chapter 2. He got established only after he executed 3 rebels that opposed him and removed another one from office. He was able to get on top of the situation because, quote, Yahweh his God was with him, as verse 1 just said. In verses 2 through 6, after he was established on the throne, he called an assembly of all the leaders of Israel for the purpose of, in verse 5, seeking counsel from Yahweh. All Israel convened at Solomon's command at the tabernacle Moses built, which was on the high place at Gibeon, about 6 miles north of Jerusalem. But the ark was in David's tabernacle in Jerusalem. Around this time, Israel had been sacrificing on random hilltops, and Solomon was guilty of that as well, 1 Kings 3:3. By the law of Moses, they should have sacrificed only at the altar in front of the tabernacle, Deuteronomy 12:11, but Yahweh didn't particularly respond against them for sacrificing on all those unauthorized places. In verse 6, Solomon offered 1,000 animals on that legitimate altar, all in the purpose of seeking counsel from Yahweh. Coming up, Yahweh will oblige him, appearing to him in a dream. Verse 7, that night God appeared to Solomon and said to him, ask for what you want me to give you. Solomon said to God, you've shown great loving kindness to David my father and have made me king in his place. Now, Yahweh God, let your promise to David my father be established, for you've made me king over a people like the dust of the earth in multitude. Now give me wisdom and knowledge, that I may go out and come in before this people, for who can judge this great people of yours? God said to Solomon, because this was in your heart, and you've not asked for riches, wealth, honor, or the life of those who hate you, nor yet have you asked for long life, but have asked for wisdom and knowledge for yourself, that you may judge my people, over whom I have made you king. Therefore wisdom and knowledge is granted to you. I'll give you riches, wealth, and honor, such as none of the kings have had, who have been before you had, and none after you will have. So Solomon came from the high place that was at Gibeon, from before the tent of meeting, to Jerusalem, and he reigned over Israel. Comment, verse 7, God answered Solomon by appearing to him and speaking with him. 1 Kings 3:5 makes it clear that it was in a dream. In the dream, God said, ask for what you want, in verse 7. In verses 8 through 10, when God made the offer, Solomon didn't go straight into request mode. He started out by crediting God for establishing him. He knew he didn't get established by himself because he was young and inexperienced, and he was facing up to his older brother and some men his father's age who had been helping run the kingdom for decades. Nevertheless, God established him according to his promise to David. Solomon had enough discernment to recognize that it was God. Psalm 100 says, "Enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise," and that's what Solomon did when he addressed God in the dream. He thanked him and praised him for establishing his word that he would become king. When we're new Christians, it may look to us as if there are a lot of obstacles getting established as Christians. It's mind-boggling to think anyone could successfully pursue God over the long haul. But God works in our favor and establishes us. So let's give him credit before we say anything else to him. Getting down to the request in verse 10, Solomon asked for wisdom and knowledge, also translated wisdom and discernment, to know the difference between good and evil as it involved his official business as king for the benefit of, quote, "this people of yours," end quote. He just wanted to be able to do a good job for Israel and not make a mess of his people's affairs. It looked impossible because of the 1,000,001 moving parts in running a nation. It's hard enough to run a small business, let alone a kingdom, and Solomon knew it. In verse 11, the request to do a good job for Israel hit God like the best thing he had heard in a long time. "Granted," he said, "I'll give you the wisdom and discernment you ask for, and I'll throw in personal riches and honor that you didn't ask for, because you put me in a good mood." We'd all like God to appear to us and say, "Ask whatever you want." That would be a dream, but he has. Jesus said, "Whatever you'll ask in my name, I'll do it, that the Father may be glorified in the Son. If you ask anything in my name, I will do it." John 14:13 and 14. He's already offered something better than 1,000 animal sacrifices by going to the cross, so there's nothing left for us but to acknowledge him and ask. So why don't we already have what we want? James 4:2 and 3 quote, "You don't have because you don't ask. You ask and don't receive because you ask with wrong motives, so that you may spend it on your pleasures," end quote. Solomon wasn't asking for his own pleasure. He was asking something that was most definitely according to the will of God, so it was a given that God would answer him. Coming up, just a hint of the ways that Solomon prospered after that. Verse 14. Solomon gathered chariots and horsemen. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen that he placed in the chariot cities and with the king at Jerusalem. The king made silver and gold to be as common as stones in Jerusalem, and he made cedars to be as common as the sycamore trees that are in the lowland. The horses which Solomon had were brought out of Egypt and from Cu. The king's merchants purchased them from Cu. They brought up and brought out of Egypt a chariot for 600 pieces of silver and a horse for 150. They also exported them to the Hittite kings and the Syrian kings. Comment: the cost of a horse from Egypt converts to about $1,600 at today's price of silver. But feeding a horse was the issue because the land was arid or semi-arid. For Solomon, cost of feeding wasn't an issue. In verse 16, Solomon got horses from Egypt or from Cu, which seems to be a city in southern Asia Minor. In verse 15, did Solomon literally make silver and gold as common as stones in Jerusalem? God does do the miraculous, but verse 15 was just an expression meaning Jerusalem was prosperous at that time, and it was a foreshadowing of the New Jerusalem. Quote, "The street of the city was pure gold, like transparent glass," Revelation 21:21. Solomon needs to be careful with the wealth Yahweh is giving him. Long before, Yahweh warned every future king of Israel, quote, "He shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt to the end that he may multiply horses, because Yahweh has said to you, you shall not go back that way again. He shall not multiply wives to himself, that his heart not turn away. He shall not greatly multiply to himself silver and gold." Deuteronomy 17:16 and 17. 2 Chronicles 2 is next at landofhavilah.net, 2 Chronicles 2.